I'd appreciate it. So, Assemblymember Baker, go ahead.
Thank you. And I think these are thoughtful questions from Senator Allen. I appreciate that. But I know you were willing to meet with me. You will be meeting with me again, and I encourage that as well to go through the details. I want to dive into a couple of areas about your testimony, Mr. Brostrom. You'd mentioned at the beginning of your testimony a theme that we've heard again and again, and that is key to enrollment of California residents is state funding. And you gave 3 examples of where you can also have funding come from. You listed 3. One was tuition and fees. One was on your investments. And the third one, can't remember, but I know what I heard from you was not a mention of cost savings. Not a mention of, I'm getting to the question, not a mention of going back internally. I think that is glaring, that was not one of your 4 things that were mentioned, especially given the report, which we may quibble about particular points. But I think that is incredibly important. Where my question is going goes to Table 10 on page 46. And that is one that says, where the auditor did some math, and we went over it a little bit with Senator Roth, on if we did a 5% cap on non-resident enrollment, you're basically going to need to find $72 million a year more. And if we did a 10% cap, which is what your Comparing Futures report, I can't remember the exact name of it, said, boy, we better not go above 10% because we might start to displace California students. That's your report. So let's say we go to 10% cap. Can you come up with $42 million a year in additional cost savings?
Well, first of all, I appreciate the question because we have spent so much time looking at both alternative revenues and new cost savings. And so let me just highlight some of the areas that we've done it in.
But make sure you get to that one question. Now, can you come up with $42 million?
Well, let me also, because I dispute the premise of what, I mean, first of all, what I think we should be looking at is funding California students. And Mr. Roth was right, is that if you cut 1,000 non-resident students, the incremental revenue that they bring in is about $25,000. So it's $25 million that they would have to replace. What they're referring to is adding more California students. And if we do have funding for California students, we will enroll them, as we have seen this year. We are generating revenues in all sorts of ways. We have every campus is increasing their indirect cost recovery rates, which is the amount that they get on research.
Can you quantify that? Are you able to quantify what you're going to say from that? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll look forward to it. I'd be grateful for that.
Yeah. Philanthropy. Last year was the first year that we went over $2 billion. Again, partly to what the auditor was correctly pointing out is a lot of that is centered at, our flagship campuses. But that's helped a lot in terms of relieving some of the stress on tuition and the state. Our medical centers, I mentioned how well they were doing. They actually provide twice as much money now to support health sciences schools as the state does, and that is margin that directly flows back to the campuses. I talked about our investment strategy. We're also using that in shoring up the pension. We have done $3.3 billion of borrowing from our short term into the pension to help increase the funded ratio. And then I would also highlight one of our biggest efforts is we're looking at doing a system-wide payroll and HR enterprise system. And this has been, very tough. We're into it, but it should yield both savings and higher service quality to all the campuses.
I'm thrilled to hear that. I will be very grateful because there has been issues sometimes in other committees, higher education, for example, and be able to show us dollars that actually come from that. But $42 million a year. Can you find $42 million a year in cost savings? I know that $9 million is identified just by changing your travel policies on an annual basis in this report. I think it's page 61. So I guess I'm answering the question for you. You can find $42 million a year. If I used B, I'm sorry.
But what I would point out is if you look at our overall cost of instruction, which we have in here, it's about $23,000 for a undergraduate student. We get, what has been the long-standing expectation is $10,000 from the state. We get another $8,000 from tuition because, $12,000 net of the return to aid. So we come up with $5,000 from other sources, several of which I have already mentioned. And so that is, we don't expect for the state or the student to make up all the cost of education.
Well, I am glad to hear that because that goes to my next point in question. I'm trying not to do the colloquy, but I'm working hard on it. So, and that is the idea of what funding is. So what we're hearing is it's more state dollars from us, which we've given you, and there is the figures that I did not hear disputed that when we gave you 42% more, there was non-resident revenue that increased by 80%. I didn't hear you address that.
Well, I'm not sure what the 42% referred to, because we are at the same funding level. We're actually lower than we were in 2005-06 from the state. We have less funding now than we had in 2005-06. We're actually at the same funding level as we are in 1998-99. We have 85,000 more students.
And that'll be a follow-up. I'll ask the state auditor on that particular point. But
non-resident tuition was one of the ways that we helped both make up that cut and also pay for our pension, which we did not have state support for.
So, because when I hear key to enrollment is state funding, I'm hearing you cutting us a check for more money, and when I'm trying to use a couple metaphors, because some of what's happening is we might be talking past each other on, could be semantics, whatever way you want to use it. And one metaphor or example is just, a family, for example. When parents were laid off, which happened in our family and all throughout my district during the Great Recession, all of our districts, they didn't say, I'm going to put as many plates of food on the table as my spouse's salary will provide. They said, I'm going to find dollars wherever I can to make sure that the food gets on the table. And so that's one metaphor that I'm feeling we're not quite getting. I want to offer that to you because that's important.
I think our evidence shows that, is that we have less funding now from the state than we did in 2005-06. And yet we are enrolling 9,000 more Californians. So we've continued to maintain access during that time, even though we had this cut.
Okay.
And one of the ways that we did that, is by bringing in non-residents and the additional revenue that they generate.
And that goes to the next question I have, and this, I'm going to bring up another metaphor, because I have heard consistently no California student has been disadvantaged or displaced because of the increase in non-residents being accepted at the university. And what's difficult is I hear the number 52% increase in resident applications, but pretty much you were saying that you capped, or you did cap. You kept resident enrollment. But non-resident enrollment increased as well, and there was many more residents admitted. So it's like if there's two doors into a very important room and everyone who wants to get into, the resident door stayed really narrow, even though there's a lot of people trying to push through it. Our residents, our constituents who've been paying into this system, the non-resident door was wide open. That's the metaphor that I'm seeing. So maybe not if you say, and I think it's disputed, not a single California resident was displaced, the demand for them was not met first.
Yeah.
And that has to change. And if you don't change it, and I'm sorry I'm monologuing, we have to be part of the solution. It's very easy for all of us to come to you with pitchforks. And trust me, I've got one, and constituents of mine have one. But part of the solution is that you are not tone deaf. And one of the worst things that can happen with a public servant is they get tone deaf. And that's what we're hearing. When the President Napolitano says this is unfounded or that things are absurd in these documents, we're trying to work together on a solution. And I just really encourage you to be part of the solution, to no longer deny that California residents are not being displaced. And if you just give us more state money, we can solve this problem, because you can cut your costs, and that's where you get the funding for those students. And I think that absolutely has to happen. I've had plenty of time to ask questions and give sermons, but I want to yield back many more things that we need to be working on. Do not be tone deaf. And know that the very same alumni that you contacted, telling them to contact our offices before this hearing to say good things, I'm hearing from them, and they're disappointed. They gave me statistics. These are constituents of mine in Walnut Creek whose son just got rejected and wasn't able to get into UC. And they said, I was asked by UC to contact you and say, this is good. Know that your very same alumni that you need to go to for philanthropic support is doing that. So with that, I appreciate the indulgence. Thank you.
Thank you. I have two more members. Assemblymember Nazarian next.
Thank you, and I appreciate that final comment as well. I was a beneficiary of a UC education, so what I'd like to see is the same opportunities being afforded to others as well. First thing first, I just want to know, first of all, part of the reason why I love this committee so much is because there's the policy discussion, there's the budget discussion. We seem to blend everything into one hearing, and we could be going on for a day on just this topic alone. And part of the hard thing about that is to decipher between the information that we get from two different groups. You're offering us oranges going back to 2002, and we're getting apples going back only 4 years. Right. And so, just so that I'm certain about this, from what the report says, within the last 4 to 5 year period, non-resident enrollment has gone from 5% to 15.5%. Am I remembering that correctly? And so that's yielded now, maybe from about 240 million to upwards of 740 million, 50 million. So a difference of about 200, almost $500 million, right? And this has been a growing trend, but this is only for Pell Grant, first generation, and minorities. Would this graph be consistent for just resident
we have
admission for resident students?
Yeah, we have that graph, and it has largely been flat in-state enrollment.
Okay.
So,
at the point of inflection of where the economy went down at 2008, 09, when we started feeling the impacts, it didn't dip down drastically.
No.
I'm not trying to put words in your mouth. I'm trying to understand this.
We actually increased slightly in the next few years.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what graph that's missing that I'd be interested in seeing is, would this have dipped down had there not been that infusion of almost $500 million increase?
Yeah, and it's a very good question. I don't want to quantify how much it would have gone down because it's hard to know what an individual campus decision would have been. I would point to CSU, which did not have the option of non-resident. I mean, some of its campuses did, but not a large number of non-resident tuitions. They cut 30,000 slots.
Okay, but I'd be interested to see that, if you can provide that.
Yeah.
I think that's very important to the context of what we're talking about, because it seems like it's the big elephant in the room, and no one's really addressed that in a graph or the same timeline, so that there's context to what's being. I have no idea what the number of seats are that would have been cut now.
One thing that might be helpful is talk about a specific campus. So UCLA is one that's had a large increase in non-residents, probably second only to Berkeley in terms of its growth. Their undergraduate California enrollment is almost identical. It's been roughly flat since the start of the recession, slightly up this year. But they are also down $200 million in state funding, not only because of the cuts, but also because of rebenching, which the auditor referred to. They made up part of that in in-state tuition, but most of it came from the non-residents that they brought in. So it really was a way that they could maintain California enrollment at a relatively flat level. And without that, they probably would have had a cut into enrollment.
So does the auditor have anything to say about that?
Well, in the data we have in the report, the flagship schools, the resident enrollment over the 5 years we looked at actually decreased. And the issue with respect to Mr. Brostrom's discussion about the fact that they're very proud of the fact that now this recent enrollment or admittance of students at those flagship schools, non-resident enrollment has been capped at those schools. So that would demonstrate to me that a cap works, because now you have more resident students who are going to be able to enroll at the flagship schools. But we saw a decline in the flagship schools, Berkeley, LA, San Diego, after the compare favorably hit and after the legislature started to restore, and we fully acknowledge in the report that the appropriation hasn't been fully restored, but it's getting there. Our concern is more and more non-resident students coming into the university system, getting their campus of choice guaranteed if they're admitted. They are never referred to Merced or any other. There were referrals in the past to Riverside of resident students. And that's where we reached the conclusion that there's displacement, because Mr. Handel said, if we don't have space for somebody at their campus of choice, a resident student, we make sure we meet the master plan by referring them to Merced. And those students end up not enrolling at Merced. So there is a capacity issue, because if there wasn't a capacity issue, you wouldn't need a referral program. You wouldn't need to refer your students to any other campus. So that's part of our conclusion with respect to students being displaced.
So this is going to lead to two questions that I had before that I wanted to ask when everyone was at the table. First of all, going back to the question of the remaining 98, 97%, who from the pool list doesn't opts out to go someplace else. Have you kept any records of where they are going?
We
So the UC schools second, third choice schools for these candidates?
You mean for the students that were referred to the Merced campus, where they went if they did not go to Merced?
Or in the referred pool in general?
Did they go to another UC campus, you mean, or to another?
No. Of the from the referred pool, about 2 to 3%
Right.
opt to go into the school.
Right.
Who are offered an admission. Well, the rest of the 97, 98%, what happens to them?
What happened to them?
And were the UC schools, do you have information on whether or not the UC schools were even their top choice? Or second, third, what? Because there's so many different contingencies also that go into this. Looking at just the number and saying 2%, it doesn't give me information on, well, maybe these students didn't want to go there anyway. This was just a second choice. But I don't know, because it makes a big difference on where the student is coming from.
No, I agree. The percentage of students that take the Merced offer is low. Of the 4,000 students, of course, that have taken that offer, I think it's life-changing. What we do know, I do not know exactly where those other students went. What we do know from NACAC and other sources is that students across the country, of course, and California as well, are applying upwards to at least 80% of the students are applying to at least 3 other universities. A quarter of those are applying to 7 or more campuses. So we do know that we're not the only choice, that we're not the only opportunity. I've also said, and I think this is important, that the referral option we completely get, that a student who may not have applied to Merced might get that invitation and say, well, I checked Merced out, that's just not the place I want to go. That's fine with us. We understand that. But we also know that we have an obligation that if a student doesn't have any other choices, that we're going to find a place. What the audit report doesn't, I think, express is that there's any instance of a student who said, I want to come to UC, and we turned them down. We did not. We provided them an opportunity to come to the university. I'll say one more thing, because I'm pretty passionate about this. I get that the referral pool is not the best option. I completely agree with that. And I agree with the auditor's recommendation on that we need to make it more attractive in a way. But the way we make it more attractive is by expanding enrollment of California residents. And in fact, I think we'll have about a 20% decline this year in residents or in the referral pool based on the expansion that you folks provide the wherewithal for us to do. So I agree. But it's still part of my obligation as an admissions professional to provide that opportunity.
And I can go on this because I'd be interested to know a little bit more.
Sure.
But to your point about the life sciences, well, I assume the benefits of the life sciences are coming from especially the top tier schools, Berkeley and UCLA, and to see that opportunities are lacking in especially those schools. It's great to see the generation of great research coming about from these campuses that leads to also great capital opportunities and contributing to the economic engine, because these are just incubator hubs. These institutions serve also as incubator hubs. And to see the fact that there are students that might be missing those opportunities to be greater engaged in those research opportunities that's where I'd also want to have a lot more questions.
So I would point out that all of our campuses, 6 of our campuses are AAU members, and so they have high levels of high-intensity research. Merced, in fact, I know the auditor was not trying to disparage, but it is a wonderful, wonderful place. It's growing. It has actually the highest percentage of application increases this year. We're working on a plan to double the size of the campus. Its research is actually, for a campus that's just 10 years old, it's already about $30 million in federally funded research. So it's trying to aspire to be the very things that you're talking about.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Nazarian. We have last comments by Senator McCarty.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I know we're running out of time. First, thank you for allowing me also to participate. I'm not on this committee. This is extremely helpful for our budget discussions, and I'll try not to go too much into that because we'll be talking to you all next week or so. And with that, I'll try not to get in the back and forth apples and oranges, but just maybe talk in plain English on 2 overarching issues. And one is the qualification issues, and one is the displacement. So first of all, I reject the notion that that you were blessed to make this change by this 1987 report, because we have the master plan, and in the last couple decades there's been a few commissions to review it, and one of them you report to is this 1987 what's the title of it, but Commission to Review the Master Plan Report. That's all it was. It was a commission. It was never endorsed by the legislature. It was never voted on. It was some entities looking for some possible interpretation. And so it seems that you took that and ran with it to make your recommendations with the changes to the boards, which is, as Ms. Baker said, a little bit counter to the report that the Regents put out in 2010, talking about the impact of this in displacement. And in the audit, I'm not sure if you refute this, but there's one point where they interview an associate president and chief policy advisor, and she acknowledges that these policy decisions have made it easier for non-residents to gain admission. And so I think that's clear. And so I guess, the question is how did you believe that this commission and a draft report 87 gave you the free rein, as Mr. Allen said, to make these wholesale changes and against the spirit of the famous 1960 Donahue Act, which is having non-residents have higher qualifications than California residents?
Well, I would argue on a couple of points. First, we didn't change the definition, the auditor did. The auditor now says that we need to use a definition by campus that students need to be in the upper half of the admitted pool. The master plan says, the 1960, as well as the revisions in the subsequent ones, say it's the upper half of the eligibility pool. The faculty don't believe that...
Sir, can you speak in your mic, please?
Oh, I'm sorry. Forgive me. The faculty... I'll state again that the important point here is that it's their new definition, and one as policymakers you may want to argue about and decide whether or not that's something you want to come to agreement to. That's a different definition. That definition says that we now need to take the upper half of every admit pool at every campus. But that's not what the master plan says. The master plan says you need to take the upper half of the eligibility pool statewide. So fundamentally, it's different. What the faculty want to do actually is engender more clarity. They said, well, that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. We need to hold campuses accountable, and so they went to the compare favorably option. So I agree with you. Yes, that is in the original language. The faculty, I think, were trying to provide additional guidance to campuses on this. My argument was with their definition, not with the master plan.
I disagree. I think I like the comprehensive review, holistic, whatever you call it, for California residents to look beyond SAT and test scores. But I think the master plan was clear when we talked about this land-grant university. Very unique how this is focused on. It should be first and foremost the commitment to California residents and taxpayers, and that's why they're so outreach. I'm getting the same calls and concerns from my constituents as well. They're just flabbergasted and saying that if we are going to increase spots to non-residents, they have to be exceedingly higher as far as their qualifications going in. So with that, as far as the other thing is, I know you can debate back and forth the GPAs and the weight and this and that, but I don't understand how that there's any debate that California access has gone down. We've been rationing access. If you look at UCLA, the numbers of admits for California students, the notion is that non-resident revenue helps us. And I said over and over during the recession, you had to do this to keep the lights on. But after the recession kind of tailed back and we passed Prop 30, we started giving you more money. Plus, as has been noted today, we've given you a ton of new money in student fee revenue from the state of California. Because when you jacked up student fees, the state of California Cal Grant came in on the backside. So if you look at the check from the state of California, it's way higher than it was even at the peak in 2006, as you allude to. So that being said, we've been displacing access to that. And one thing I'm perplexed on, if you look at just one campus, my campus up the road here at UC Davis, you say that these non-resident increased revenues help increase access to expand enrollment for Californians. But on the report, in the audit report on page 72, it talks about how over half of the non-resident revenue at UC Davis, because each campus can spend the money as they wish. So over half of the money they've been focusing on non-resident revenues to support admin costs. So they're not increasing seats for people across California, but they're spending their money elsewhere. So I don't understand how that jives with non-residents helping expand seats for California kids.
Well, I might comment on that, Mr. McCarty. What we do within the university, we have what are called core funds, and they're state funds, they're in-state tuition, and there are other general funds, which includes non-resident tuition, includes some patent revenues, it includes indirect cost recovery, and a few others. It's very similar to what the state does. The state takes personal income tax, it takes corporate tax, it takes sales tax, and it blends it all together. So the core funds at every campus are made up of those sources, and then they spend it on their academic mission. So it's not, we don't earmark and say this non-resident dollar is going to go to this faculty member's salary or to graduate student support. Every campus has a different need, and they will apply it as it is. So we can tell you in aggregate how that is spent, but we cannot track every single dollar to where it goes within each campus.
Well, I would just think that since it's such a controversial decision you made, and since it's contrary and undermines your Regent decision in 2010, that you would spend 100% of those dollars focusing on enrollment, because that's what the notion is. But I know...
It's not focused on enrollment. I mean, it is focused on academic quality.
No, but I would think that you would spend all the increased revenue to focus on student enrollment.
That's true.
But this is for another day. I just want to thank the auditor for giving us a tremendous analysis and oversight. I know this is a tough issue, and I concur. We're all in this together. We need to make sure the state needs to make a commitment too to focus more on funding higher ed, which I'm committed to do so. We're trying to do so. But also, I think that there are some changes that we could focus on, and one we'll be looking at in our budget process this year, which is having a direct nexus and tying in the appropriation to conditions as far as enrolling students, including Californians. So, thank you.
One last question by Assemblymember Gibson as we can move along, because we still have a student's perspective and public comment.
Well, thank you very much. I'm going to just make a comment because I think that a lot of questions have already been asked and also answered. I am still perplexed based on a lot of things that the UC have said here today. And leaves a number of questions in my mind why our students are still playing second fiddle to out-of-state students as it relates to this report. This is our state auditor. This is who we rely on, the expertise of the staff. I am comfortable with their audit and capabilities of putting together a comprehensive report in which we can certainly digest and understand whether we agree with it or not. I, on the other hand, totally agree with this particular perspective. I think the focus needs to certainly be that the university needs to look at how you are accepting residents here in California. I always give this analogy. How can I feed my neighbor's kids and my own kids are going hungry? I have to take care of home first. And also to the University of Merced, you are a terrific institution of higher learning. We appreciate you and don't want anything to be said as if they are a second-rate university. They are, in fact, a good institution of higher learning and appreciate the leadership there. But I have many, many concerns, and I need to have a meeting with you. After this, my office will reach out to you to answer a number of questions. I appreciate the chair for giving me this opportunity and also having this hearing. Because I was getting ready to let loose, but time won't let me.
Thank you, Assemblymember Gibson. With that, I want to thank both presentations from coming forward, UC and the State Auditor. Now I would ask we return to your seats and have our student perspective by Kevin Sabo, President of the University of California Student Association, come forward.